We've, falsely depicted Vladimir Putin as a war criminal, and yet Israel has been killing Gazan civilians at a rate over 9 times higher. But in terms of Israel, we're going to give them a blank check, essentially, just as we've given Ukraine a blank check to fight an endless war against Russia, so they never have to make peace.
Right.
We're doing the same with Israel in its war in Gaza. What it's really exposed the fact that the U.S. and the Biden administration particularly has little to no influence on Israeli policy. If the U.S. is really going to be a player on the diplomatic stage, we have to know when it's the right time is to exert pressure, even against our allies. When they do something grossly immoral, as in the case here.
Everyone, this is David Pyne. He is the Executive Vice President of the Task Force on National and Home Security, and David is one of the few American voices I've found that isn't afraid to speak out against the U.S. government's policies and expose the glaring double standards in our foreign policy. On one hand, we preach to the world that Vladimir Putin is a war criminal and condemn his actions in Ukraine. But on the other hand, we cut off humanitarian aid to Gaza while sending billions of dollars in aid to Israel to support their war, which has broken international law, been deemed a plausible genocide, and has become the largest humanitarian crisis in recent history. How can the U.S. foreign policy be so inconsistent and contradicting all at the same time? David Pyne is similar to me. We are both anti-war and simply want the U.S. government to actually stay true to its words and be a leader on the global stage. With our current foreign policies, the United States' reputation on the global stage continues to fall, and even worse, it continues to drag us into unnecessary conflicts around the globe. In today's interview, David provides us all a deeper understanding into Israel's war in Gaza, but we also discuss larger global trends, including the war in Ukraine and potential conflicts in the Taiwan Strait with China. This is a fascinating conversation. Let's begin. Well, everybody, I'm very happy to welcome back in the studio David Pyne. David, we had a great discussion on Russia-Ukraine, but I want to shift to another war that the United States is absolutely heavily involved. That, of course, is the Israel's war in Gaza. This has really become the number one humanitarian crisis in the planet right now. A couple weeks ago, Secretary of State Antony Blinken came out and said this is the first time in history that an entire population is now at an acute starvation level. In addition, an entire population is in need of humanitarian aid. What we've seen unfold in Gaza is truly, just unfathomable, in my opinion. I just really find it very hard to see the images. Of course, we now live in a world where everything is connected on Instagram, on TikTok. Social media, is making things very transparent, and that is very much open to the world right now. David, I wanted to interview you about this because you've come up with a peace plan, for peace in the Middle East, specifically within Gaza. But let's go ahead and open this conversation. Let me know your thoughts about America's involvement in this war, and I want to know what your thoughts on, the entire Israel-Palestine conflict is.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me back on the show. So, this war, between Hamas and Israel, it's really a proxy war with Iran, and it's a war that that was. It could be said that it was provoked or unprovoked. I tend to think that it was the Palestinian national aspirations, to have their own country, right, are the prime reason for the Hamas attacks, which are inexcusable. They were completely horrific. Killed nearly 1,200 innocent Israelis, and many atrocities were committed. But Israel does have a record of treating its Palestinian residents, with the exception of the ones that have been Israeli citizens since 1948, as kind of second-class citizens.
Right.
Perhaps as illegal immigrants are treated to some extent here in the U.S. But I supported Israel in its military response against Gaza. But I argued that for a more measured response, a response that would be, I guess, along the lines of the Israeli invasion of Gaza, which was a partial invasion in 2009, in which it was an 18-day war. Israel pulled out its troops after 18 days, and essentially it was just kind of a raid to, undermine and weaken Hamas militarily.
Right.
And instead, what we've seen and Israel do is they've engaged in a kind of an indefinite conflict that could last years. I mean, Gaza is this isn't like Russia, Ukraine, where Russia's 5 times larger than Ukraine, and there's some kind of balance, where the war is drawn out or stalemated to some extent.
Right.
Israel is 57 times larger than Gaza. Gaza is tiny in comparison, and Israel itself is only the size of El Salvador. So, but Israel is the 4th largest nuclear power in the world. I believe Iran is likely a nuclear power as well. So, if it's easy to see how a proxy war with Iran could lead to an interstate regional war, perhaps including Iran, and perhaps even embroiling the U.S. as well, that could potentially escalate the nuclear level. I think that's unlikely, but what we've seen is Israel has engaged in a massive bombing campaign designed to make, essentially target all of Gaza's critical infrastructure and make living conditions for Gazan civilians unbearable, so that they'd want to, kind of self-deport, to flee Gaza just to ensure the survival of the families from starvation. And unfortunately, there's no safety valve. Israel has surrounded, Gaza with an unbreakable air, naval, and land blockade, and is even trying to prevent 90% of the humanitarian aid from reaching Gaza citizens. So that was the point of my peace plan, to ensure that the rights and protection of Gaza civilians are ensured.
Yeah, I think we've, I'm going to give my opinion now on this, because I think this is a very interesting, it's not interesting is not the right word. I mean, this is it's a humanitarian crisis. I think it's really a lack of humanity, and it puts the United States in a very difficult position, because quickly right now on the international stage, the United States is being isolated along with Israel, and this is not in the strategic best interest of neither country. I think it's very dangerous. What we're doing is continuing this endless supply of U.S. military weapons. And what's interesting here, David, is that we are breaking our own law. It does say in United States laws that were, by the way, put into effect after our missteps in Afghanistan and Iraq. For example, we are not allowed by law to supply U.S. military weapons to countries that are carrying out massive human rights violations. Check. That is certainly something that Israel is doing. In addition, we are not allowed to provide, military weapons to countries that are blocking United States military aid. There's another check for Israel. So, in this blind support to Israel, United States is really contradicting itself. It's, we're full of hypocrisy. We have tremendous double standards, and it really weakens us on the international stage. Because, for example, I don't think Russia and China are looking objectively at what the United States says with any kind of credibility. We have a credibility issue right now. We cannot criticize, Russia and Putin and say, hey, Vladimir Putin, you have done war crimes in Ukraine. We want to put you on trial. Meanwhile, at the same standpoint, we're literally supplying the ammunition to Netanyahu to carry out this absolute carnage in Gaza that has escalated far beyond a response. We always say, Israel has a right to military, to protect themselves. Israel has a right to respond, to this terrorist attack. It's a complicated issue, right? Because I think we go back and we look at the 70 years of occupation. When has Palestine ever been treated fairly? You've had the UNWRA. This was a United Nations relief agency that was established immediately after the creation of Israel, when millions of Palestinians were displaced. That was really a temporary solution. But here we are 75 years later, and that organization is still the primary way that many people in Gaza get their food and get their supplies. And it's really turning into a humanitarian catastrophe. And unfortunately, as a United States citizen, I'm very ashamed by this, because our governments, our hands are directly involved in this. Israel would not be able to carry this out without the United States support and without our arms. That's basically the thing. And I look at our response was to drop some humanitarian aid via airplanes. It's incredibly inefficient. It's quite dangerous. We see how over 5 civilians were killed because the parachutes didn't deploy correctly and struck them, immediately killing them. And obviously, whatever aid can be dropped from the air is a drop in the bucket to what these millions of people in Gaza are now experiencing, with this acute level of starvation. So it's a tough one. What is your thoughts on the United States as far as how this makes us look on the international stage with this blind supporting of this this war?
Well, it's amazingly hypocritical, because we've falsely depicted Vladimir Putin as a war criminal, and yet Israel has been killing Gazan civilians at a rate over 9 times higher in terms of per day of the conflict. It's been over 9.4 times higher, according to one of my latest calculations. And what are the what's the U.S. response? I mean, the U.S. response to Putin is we won't meet with them to end the war. Well, we want the war to continue. Ceasefire is kind of verboten. We're not allowed to talk about that. It's a kind of a bad word. But in terms of Israel, we're going to give them a blank check. Essentially, just as we've given Ukraine a blank check to fight an endless war against Russia, so they never have to make peace. Right. We're doing the same with Israel in its war in Gaza. What it's really exposed the fact that the U.S. and the Biden administration, particularly, has little to no influence on Israeli policy, despite the fact that we've given them perhaps over $75 billion, according to my calculations, in aid since the 1979 accords between Sadat and Israel that formalized a peace and allowed the Israeli withdrawal from Sinai. So if the U.S. is really going to be a player on the diplomatic stage, we have to know when it's the right time is to exert pressure, even against our allies. When they do something grossly immoral, as in the case here. And again, I'm speaking as a supporter of a continued U.S. alliance with Israel. But we have to put some guardrails on it. We have to, try to limit, their actions to ensure that war crimes are not committed. And that's just, it makes good strategic sense for the U.S. Really, I think if we were to simply, condition all further U.S., military assistance to Israel on them, accepting a permanent ceasefire and armistice agreement along the lines that I proposed that actually are quite favorable towards Israel, then I think Iran would probably kind of put the brakes on some of their proxy attacks against U.S. forces in the region, and perhaps even the Houthis as well. So really, the key to end this proxy war with Iran is twofold. Number one, we have to end the war in Gaza, no matter what. It should be an immediate ceasefire, an armistice agreement, and then we perhaps negotiate the peace terms. And then number two, we need to pull all U.S. troops out of Iraq and Syria minimally, but probably Jordan as well, so that they're not prime targets for Iranian proxy attacks, including from the Iraqi military. Because these Iranian militia groups are actually integrated in the Iraqi armed forces that the U.S. has trained and armed. So we're essentially funding these, in some cases, lethal attacks against our own troops in the region.
No, you're spot on, and I think I want to just hit on your first point that you made is we certainly support the right for Israel to exist as a country. I think the United States and Israel have always had close relations. I'm certainly not against that, but I do see this amazing ability for Netanyahu and really his entire cabinet that he has surrounded himself with. And I think people need to understand, Netanyahu is a very corrupt politician, and he has, I believe that this war has entered into a phase where he is just trying for political survival at this point and is becoming more and more extreme. We've seen, the problem is we don't have that pressure in the United States, right? We dictate what Israel can do. Israel wouldn't exist without the United States, right? Israel would not have survived this long without the United States sending that $75 billion in military aid, over the last, 30, 40 years. So, we are very close allies, but I agree with you. There needs to come a point where the United States steps up and leverages the incredible leverage that we actually have. I think it's very easy for Biden to step up and say, look, you will no longer use U.S. military weapons in this assault. It's no more. We will not stand for that. You are not allowed to use any more. That would be an easy way to, intervene and to put some guardrails, as you said, on this relationship. I think that, right now, what's interesting is you saw a few weeks ago, Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer came out with a very powerful speech. I thought it was very interesting. He said he took 2 months to write that speech, going over, the back and forth, the correct verbs and the right way that he wanted to word this. Now, he's also very interesting. He's the highest ranking Jewish official in the United States government. And he said, I believe that Netanyahu needs to be replaced. I believe that he is an obstacle to peace and that, he's out of control. control. And of course, Netanyahu blasted him. Another interesting thing, though, I want to just touch on this briefly, is that, just yesterday, there was another United Nations vote for a ceasefire. Now, normally, the United States would always veto this. It's obviously the United States and Israel together would veto this. But yesterday, the United States abstained. And that was quite a substantial move because it differed. This prompted Netanyahu, obviously more outrage from him. I think he's very used to, commanding the United States what to do. And we, pretty much always follow that. And that has actually prompted Netanyahu to cancel an upcoming visit to the White House. He's so enraged with the United States. But is there really any substance behind this, David? I mean, is it more of just kind of almost like a symbolic move? I mean, immediately the United States, we voted to abstain and then said, just so you know, nothing's changed between the United States and Israel relationship. We're still close allies. Nothing's changed. So what do you make of that?
Well, I think Netanyahu is really, again, showing who has the power in the relationship. I mean, Israel is kind of, they have AIPAC. Obviously, there's a powerful Israeli lobby in the country that, as Dr. John Mearsheimer famously exposed in one of his books, I think in the late 80s, early 90s. And, there's a real bane, in terms of foreign lobbyists, whether it's Ukrainian or Chinese or Israeli, having all this massive influence over U.S. foreign policy to make us do things that are against our national security interests. And I think Netanyahu is just kind of pouting and it's not the big deal that he's presenting it because Biden of course has been calling for a ceasefire, but there's been no teeth behind his demand for a ceasefire. He hasn't pressured Israel to do anything.
Right.
He's just I think he's sincere in wanting a ceasefire and an end to the conflict, but he's unwilling to cross the the Israeli lobby and his pro-Israel politicians to accomplish that. But right. We'll say I think Schumer's speech I think was over the line. I'm not a supporter of regime change. Obviously, we want any elections, whether or not we support Netanyahu for re-election. I agree with you. I think he's done a poor job overall, certainly with regards to this war. And he had intelligence and warning that the attack was coming. And there's been some talk as to whether he chose to, ignore those warnings deliberately so he could have a pretext to establish his dream of greater Israel that we know he's had since 2007, when he actually spoke to the Egyptian president and proposed that all of Gaza's 2.4 million citizens be relocated to the Sinai so Israel can essentially annex that territory. And, I don't, I understand where he's coming from, in terms of, Gaza being a national security threat and wanting to further expand his national territory. But, that's just, it's just unacceptable. We don't, it's essentially a war crime, a violation of international law to have massive deportations of a population based on their race and ethnicity. And we saw that with Hitler. We saw that with the Soviets. And I would argue even with the U.S. itself is, we supported the expulsion of 18 million Germans from German territories and their homelands. That there's just no excuse for that type of activity.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Chuck Schumer's words were good, and I think I support what he said. And as far as I think that a lot of Republicans have kind of obviously gone back on that, saying, "Look, you can't force a regime change." That's actually what the United States does really well. Again, that's our MO. We forced a tremendous amount of regime change around the world, but I think it's more Schumer just saying that Netanyahu is not what Israel needs right now. And I think that's what we're seeing even in the polls in Israel. His popularity is declining very quickly. I just think Israel's in a very dangerous spot. And I think that's where, I've made several videos about this Israel-Palestine conflict. And we've reached a point in society today where you cannot speak out against this without being labeled as anti-Semitic. And I'm certainly not anti-Semitic. I agree that Israel has a right to exist. They have a right to respond. But, we have to analyze, what's going on. I think what you just hit on is something that more and more people are bringing to the table now, saying, look, Israel was warned ahead of this October 7th that something was going to happen. There's a case to be made. That's a very good hypothesis that, maybe Netanyahu did know this and just let this happen because, number one, he's facing, corruption charges and basically was going to be ousted. And maybe this, obviously, once you go to a war, now that's not the focus anymore. Now those corruption charges are on the back burner and, hey, we've got to go in and destroy Hamas. But like you said, you're embarking on a plan that's absolutely unobtainable. I mean, they said it'd be a couple of months, offensive movement, and obviously we're now coming into the 6th month of this conflict. I mean, again, it's just absolute devastation, throughout Gaza. Very little hope for the future of these people. But I just think the longer that this continues, and with the Biden administration not being able to show its teeth and really result in any change, this is just strategically very dangerous for the long term for both Israel and the United States, I feel.
Yeah, and once again, the Biden administration has no strategy. I mean, they call for a ceasefire, but they don't have any willingness to implement it or pressure Israel to do anything. So we have essentially two endless conflicts that with no end in sight and no plan or strategy for how to end them on terms that are favorable to the United States. So as a result, we're being kind of drawn into these two conflicts. We're wasting our military strength at a time that China may be prepping to invade Taiwan, and we should get involved in that war either. That's a whole different discussion we could have perhaps on a different show,
right?
Because I do have a Taiwan peace plan as well.
I'm very outspoken on that. I definitely we might differ a lot on that one, but I mean, I don't think China's in a position to attack Taiwan. I mean, we'll keep this discussion on Israel Palestine, but I think again, I will just very quickly say I think the ball's in the United States court. I mean, I think when you have we have a policy with China that is called the One China policy. It's been the foundation of our certainly our foreign policy with China for well over 50 years. I think the issue is really if we're going to go down that road of saying, hey, let's move away from strategic ambiguity to strategic clarity. And if we go down that road, again, that's the United States going down that road. I think that could open another can of worms. But what you've said is correct. I mean, we're now trapped in two endless wars. Ukraine and Russia has no end in sight. And the problem is again, I think we have a credibility issue. I mean, you look at, for example, look at the Afghanistan disaster, right? We spent 20 years, $2 trillion, went through 4 U.S. presidents to replace the Taliban with the Taliban. I mean, there's no real credibility left in what the United States military does, other than that we come in and we always make things worse. And I think that's just really unfortunate. And I think, again, the real loss is obviously the people in those regions, but it's also the American citizens who just don't have a government that is actually looking after their interest. Again, I mean, I think with why there's been such a outcry with the border here, the southern border, I think because that's what's affecting Americans. We want to see a tangible result there, right? We need to see a change. And it's a very interesting time, David. Obviously, we got this big election in November coming up. I'm not sure if Trump or Biden is the change that we need to see in America. I'd love to see. I don't think many Americans are very happy about a rematch of the 2020, but nonetheless, here we are. That's our choices. So it's gonna be interesting. And I know you and I are going to continue following this. Advocating for peace and advocating for better diplomacy, and hopefully some cooler heads will prevail.
Yeah, absolutely. I just want to agree with your point that every war the U.S. has fought, with the exception of the Korean War, has left the world less secure and less better off, both the inhabitants of the region as well as the U.S. Itself in terms of national security. Both world wars, I would argue, we came out worse off, and certainly with World War II, we became kind of the policemen of the world, and that's only accentuated since the end of the Cold War with the Soviet Union.
Well, David, I always enjoy our chats. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to have you on. Very happy to interview you about these couple of months. So, guys, if you have not seen our first interview about Russia and Ukraine, I'm going to drop that link down below, and we're also going to drop links to David's Substack, and he has a fantastic Substack newsletter that you can join and that you can receive his latest updates. So, David, I want to thank you for all your work that you do, and again, thank you for being a guest on our show today.
Thanks for all you do as well, and it was great to be on the show. Have a great day.
Perfect. Thank you. Everyone, as always, I want to thank you for your incredible support. It's because of your support that our channel continues to grow every month, expanding our reach and allowing us to bring in world-class guests like David Pyne into the channel for these exclusive interviews. If you haven't already seen our first interview with David, where we discussed in depth the U.S. involvement in the Russia and Ukraine conflict, please click here to watch that full episode. Once again, thank you all for your incredible support, and I look forward to seeing you all in our next video soon.